Have you ever wondered what happens in a cemetery when the world is asleep and the dead refuse to stay silent? Tonight, I'm taking you into the shadows of a place where grief, memory, and the supernatural collide, a place where children who never left still whisper, watch, and wait. What you're about to hear are real stories told by priests, encounters that defy explanation, moments that linger long after the prayers are said. Dare to stay with me, because once you hear what walks among the graves, you may never look at a cemetery the same way again. I followed the sound anyway, around one small plot, then another. The laughter came again, softer now, almost teasing, like a memory trying to find its shape. My hand rested on the rosary in my pocket. I felt eyes on me, not the eyes of the living, but the weight of those who had been. I tried to rationalize. Perhaps grief twists perception. Perhaps it is the longing of the parents, echoing through space. Perhaps the world itself sometimes whispers what we cannot see. The wind picked up, moving through the tiny stones, scattering leaves over unmarked graves. I could feel the air thicken. Each breath was a pause, each step deliberate. I reached a small cross, its base sunken from time. I knelt. The laughter rose again, this time very close, almost brushing my ear, as though a small hand had touched me and then withdrawn. I did not flinch. I whispered, louder now, asking God to give peace, and then it was gone. I stood alone. The clouds had broken slightly, and a thin shaft of light fell across the hill. For a moment, I imagined the children there, laughing in some secret, hidden corner of the afterlife. I imagined their joy, untainted by grief, and a wave of sorrow hit me, not for myself, but for the world that could not understand such brief, strange moments. Back in the rectory that night, the incident replayed endlessly. I wrote a note in the parish log, necessary official. No one was present, nothing disturbed, but the memory would not be locked in paper. It followed me, drifting into prayers, into dreams. I wrestled with my faith. Was it imagination, a trick of memory, or something that had chosen to linger, to remind me that even in death there is a pulse, a whisper, a hint of what the world cannot grasp? Weeks later I returned. The children's hill felt different. The air smelled of damp earth and something faintly sweet. I walked slowly, letting my fingers brush each small headstone. My lips moved in prayer, soft and pleading. May the joy of the little ones who rest here never be forgotten. May their laughter reach heaven and touch us still. My voice trembled, not from fear, but because sorrow and wonder are never far apart. I never heard that sound again, not a giggle, not a whisper, and yet I do not walk that section without pause. Not with dread, not with superstition, but with reverence, because in that space, I learned a truth that no sermon could ever convey, that our ministry is not only to the living, it is also to the dead, to the moments of joy they leave behind, the small, fleeting traces of life that persist long after silence falls. Even now, when I pass the children's hill, I feel it, the faintest brush of air, the memory of a laugh that had no source. I do not call it a ghost. I do not name it. I only bow my head and pray, because that is what a priest does when the world grows strange, and the veil between sorrow and hope becomes thin. We listen, we remember, we bear witness. Sometimes, in the deep quiet of the night, I whisper a question into the darkness. Are you still here? And though no answer comes, I feel it. A weightless presence, a reminder that the world is wider than we can see, and that some mysteries exist to touch our hearts, leaving us haunted not by fear, but by the fragile, unending threads of life and memory. I have spent most of my life in the quiet corners of churches, not the bright halls filled with sunlight or the busy offices where papers pile up. I have always found my place in the shadows, in the spaces where silence sits heavy. My ministry is not measured in sermons or collections, but in the moments between life and death. I have walked graveyards more times than I can count, each stone a story, each name a prayer whispered into eternity. It was late autumn, the kind of day when the sky hangs low, thick with clouds that promise rain. I had finished a small funeral for a man who had lived quietly, barely noticed, barely mourned. The cemetery was empty now. The only sound was the wind moving through dry leaves. I walked slowly, letting my eyes trace the neat rows of stones, the veteran flags trembling faintly. I have always found order in this place, civil, spiritual, measured, and yet, sometimes, order is only skin deep. I was near the children's section, a place I visit reluctantly. No funeral stays with me longer than those 4 little ones. I have held parents as they screamed into emptiness, carried infants I baptized just hours before they passed, and felt the ache of a world that is broken beyond repair. The stones here are small, fragile markers, almost timid. I stepped carefully, whispering my prayers, hoping the act itself might ease the sorrow that lingers like fog. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement, quick and light, between the stones. I froze. My mind told me it was a child, a visitor who had strayed. I stepped closer. The ground was soft from earlier rain, leaving prints easily, but there was nothing, no footprints, not even the faintest disturbance of grass or mud, only my own careful steps pressed into the soil. And then I heard it, a sound small and clear, like someone holding back glee, childlike laughter, fast, playful, circling as if it came from nowhere and everywhere at once. My heart stopped. I am a priest, trained to face death, to guide the living through grief, yet this was different. It did not belong here. It was wrong, yet not frightening, not at first. It was fragile, almost tender. I whispered a prayer, the words automatic. Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord. The laughter stopped. Silence pressed against me like a heavy stone. I walked the rows, reading names, recalling faces, funerals, prayers, tears. A girl who had died on her first communion day. A boy claimed by leukemia before he could even ride a bicycle. An infant baptized and gone within the same breath. The stones speak in silence. I have learned to listen. I have walked the parish cemetery at night more times than I can remember. Most priests avoid it when the sun dips low. I do not. The quiet suits me. The shadows between the stones feel alive. Not in the sense of danger, but in the sense of memory, presence, and sometimes warning. It was late October. A mist had settled over the graves, soft and chilling. I had just returned from a graveside service for an elderly parishioner. The family had left hours ago. I lingered, as I often do, walking slowly among the plots, whispering prayers for those whose voices had long since faded. The air smelled of wet earth and fallen leaves. A crow croaked somewhere beyond the trees. I passed the veterans section, straight and neat, flags drooping with moisture. Then I turned toward the children's plots. My chest tightened. Every priest knows the weight here. Little graves, small crosses, names carved too soon. I stepped carefully, my rosary brushing against my hand, and then I saw movement. A figure darted between the stones, quick, almost too fast to follow. A child, I thought, someone's living child who had wandered. I moved closer. My shoes sank into soft soil, leaving prints in the damp ground. But there were no prints following the figure. Nothing had pressed the grass but the dew itself. The sound came next. Soft, high-pitched, and impossibly near. Childlike laughter, not crying, not calling, it circled me, fleeting, playful, and completely unreal. I froze. The logical part of me wanted to see a child, to reassure myself. The other part, the part that had prayed over these graves for years, held its breath. I called a prayer aloud. Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord. The laughter paused. Silence settled like a wet cloth over the hill. I moved slowly, scanning the shadows, reading names on stones. Sarah, age 7, Matthew 5. An infant I had baptized only hours before he passed. Each life weighed on me like a stone in my chest. I followed the sound, stepping around plots, peering into mist and shadow. The laughter resumed, softer, almost teasing, as if it were aware of me. It never stayed still, never came from one direction. I pressed my lips together, gripping my rosary, whispering faster prayers. My mind raced. Hallucination, grief, some trick of the wind. But grief does not laugh. Not like this. A breeze moved through the hill, carrying a scent faintly sweet. The mist swirled around my ankles. Then I saw her, just for a second, a little girl, pale, hair loose over her shoulders, running between stones. But she was wrong, not alive. Her feet did not touch the ground. She paused, turned toward me, and vanished before I could call out. I knelt, I prayed harder, louder, my words shook. May your souls find rest. May your laughter be remembered, even here. I stayed there until the mist cleared slightly. The graveyard was empty, silent, but the memory of that fleeting form pressed against my chest. Back in the rectory, I could not shake it. The memory of her gaze, of the laughter, of the impossibility of what I had seen. I wrote it down in the parish log, necessary for record. No disturbance, no child present. Officially, nothing happened. Yet the truth pressed heavy in my chest. Something had been here, something that was neither fully alive nor fully gone. Weeks passed. I avoided the children's section at night, but I could not avoid my memory. During the day, I walked slower, read each name, whispered prayers I had never said aloud before. May your joy, however fleeting, reach heaven. may your presence linger in quiet ways. One night I returned, drawn as if by the sound itself. The wind had shifted, the mist hung low. I felt it before I saw it, a presence near my shoulder, gentle, weightless. I did not turn. The laughter came again, almost behind me, almost laughing at me. My breath caught, my heart hammered. I whispered a prayer, and the laughter stopped, fading like a sigh. The silence that followed was different, heavier, deeper. The cemetery had a pulse I could feel in my chest, in my knees, in my spine. Something was watching, waiting, reminding me that this world, the one we live in, is only one layer of life. The other layers are quiet, patient, and sometimes playful, even when sorrow dominates. I do not know what I saw that night. A spirit, a memory made flesh, or the world bending in a way I could not comprehend. It matters little. What matters is the lesson it left me. As priests, we stand between life and death, between grief and hope. Sometimes, in that space, the veil thins, and we hear things the world cannot name. Since then, I visit the Children's Hill often, not out of duty, but out of reverence. I walk slowly, whispering names, feeling for the faintest shift in the air. I do not expect to see her again, but I always remember, and when the wind shifts just right, I think I hear it, the laughter of children who are gone, reminding me that joy, like grief, does not always die with the body. Some nights, when the rectory is quiet and the moon is low, I hear the sound again in my dreams, tiny, fragile, and impossible. And I wake knowing that no sermon, no prayer, no act of ministry will ever capture what that moment taught me. That between sorrow and hope, silence and sound, life and death, there are mysteries meant not for explanation, but for remembrance. And so I pray, always, for the living, for the dead, and for the laughter that lingers, hidden in shadows, waiting for someone patient enough to hear it. I have always preferred the silence of old churches to the noise of life. But the quietest place of all is the cemetery. Stones stand like sentinels, shadows cling to crosses, and in the spaces between, something waits, sometimes patient, sometimes restless. It was early winter. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving the cemetery shrouded in a thin, grey twilight. I had conducted the funeral for a man no one noticed until he was gone. His family had moved away years ago. I stayed afterward, as I always do, walking the grounds, reciting prayers for those who have no one left. The air was bitter, sharp with frost. Each breath formed a cloud that vanished as quickly as it appeared. I turned toward the older section, where generations of families sleep side by side. There is comfort in these plots, a sense of continuity, and yet, something felt wrong. The frost had frozen in odd patterns across the stones, like fingers stretching toward me. My hand instinctively touched my rosary. I whispered a prayer, but it sounded thin in the air, swallowed by the hush of the graveyard. That's when I noticed it. A small figure crouched among the stones. At first I thought it was a child. My mind tried to rationalize. A family visiting, a child exploring. But the figure did not move like a living child. It was too still, too careful. Its head tilted unnaturally, as if studying me rather than the ground. I stepped closer. The ground was firm, frozen under the frost, yet no footprints led to or from the figure. It should have been impossible. My heart quickened. I whispered the familiar prayer, eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord. The figure straightened. The faintest breath of wind carried a sound I will never forget. Not crying, not calling, but a soft, drawn-out wail. Not human, not animal, something in between. I froze. My mind raced, searching for reason. Perhaps it was grief twisting reality. Perhaps fatigue. Perhaps the cold had warped my senses. And yet, there was something in the air, heavy, watching, patient. I could feel it pressing against my chest. The figure began to move, not running, not walking, but gliding. Its feet did not touch the ground. Each step was silent. The wail rose, echoing off the stones. I gripped my rosary, whispering faster prayers, each word desperate, and then it spoke not in words, but in sound. A faint, broken mimicry of a child's voice, repeating, Father, Father. I stumbled backward, fear clawing at me, but I could not run. I have faced death countless times. I have comforted the bereaved, held trembling hands, watched life slip away, and yet this eye could not place it. It was a thing neither alive nor dead. It was intent. It wanted something. I fell to my knees. My lips moved in prayer I barely recognized. The figure hovered closer, tilting its head, watching its eyes or where its eyes should have been shimmered faintly in the dying light. I dared not raise my own gaze. I whispered again, may they find peace. May your soul be free. For a heartbeat, the wailing stopped. Silence filled the air like snow. And then a brittle, dry laughter, more terrifying than any scream. It came from everywhere and nowhere. I clutched my rosary like a lifeline. My knees ached. My ears rang. I could feel the frost biting through my clothing, but I did not move. I could not. The figure vanished, just like that. No trace, no footprints, no disturbance, nothing. Only the faint smell of damp earth and something older, ancient sorrow, perhaps, lingering in the soil. I stayed there long after, kneeling among the stones, whispering names, praying harder than I ever had. May the dead rest in peace. May their pain find no echo here. Weeks later, I returned. The children's section felt heavier than before. Even in daylight, the stones seemed to lean toward me. I walked slowly, my hand trailing over cold granite. I whispered prayers for the parents who had left in tears. For infants I had baptized only to bury. For children whose lives had ended too soon. I waited for something to appear, but the cemetery was still. Only the wind answered me, whistling through bare branches. Yet I knew, I could feel it. The presence had not gone. It lingered in the frost, in the shadows, in the spaces between the stones. It waited for patience, for reverence, for the recognition that life and death are not as separate as the living believe. And I understood then a truth that no sermon could ever teach. That grief, hope, memory, and fear are bound together in ways we cannot measure. That sometimes the dead reach back not for vengeance, not for malice, but to remind us. I leave the children's hill last, every visit. I touch the stones, whisper prayers, speak their names aloud. Sometimes I think I hear faint laughter, faint steps, or a sigh that moves with the wind. I never see it again, and yet I do not fear it. Reverence keeps the fear at bay. Understanding, perhaps, that some things exist to be witnessed, not explained. I write this not as a tale to frighten, but as a truth I cannot shake. Priests stand daily between life and death, between the silence of the grave and the hope of eternity. And in that space, sometimes, the impossible chooses to touch us, to remind us that sorrow and joy, laughter and grief, are not as far apart as we think. And when the night is cold and the cemetery quiet, if you listen closely, you may hear it too. A soft, fleeting presence, waiting for someone patient enough to notice. We listen, we remember, we pray. And sometimes, we are haunted not by fear, but by the fragile threads that connect life to death, and the whispers that pass between them. I have always felt more at home among gravestones than in the warm light of the church. There is a strange order there, a quiet rhythm between life and death. But some nights, that order dissolves. Some nights, the dead speak in ways you cannot understand, and all you can do is listen. It was late autumn. The cemetery was damp from an afternoon drizzle. Leaves clung to the stones, slick and brown. I had just finished a small funeral, the kind that passes quietly, unnoticed, leaving the mourners staring at empty streets afterward. I stayed behind. I always do. I walk the grounds, praying silently, tracing the rows of names I know by heart. I stopped near the children's section. The stones there are small, delicate, almost apologetic. Each name carries a weight that never lessens, no matter how many times I visit. Tonight, the air felt thicker than usual. I could sense it before I saw it, a movement too swift, darting between the graves. A child, I thought. Surely a living child had wandered. My steps were careful, the ground was soft, yet there were no footprints. Nothing disturbed, only the stillness of wet grass. My rosary slipped into my palm without thought. I whispered the words I have repeated thousands of times, but tonight, they felt inadequate. Then I heard it. A laugh. Small, sharp, playful. A child's laugh, but wrong. It had no source. It circled me, fading and returning, never steady. My chest tightened. I knew every name here. I had prayed over these little graves, comforted families, held hands slick with tears. And now laughter. Here, it felt like a wound and a whisper at once. I followed the sound, tracing rows of stones. A girl, maybe 6, appeared between two markers. Pale, her hair hanging loose, she moved too lightly, too quickly, weaving around stones as if weightless. I called out, nothing. She paused, looked toward me, and vanished before my eyes. I fell to my knees. I whispered every prayer I knew. Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord. Silence pressed close. I dared not move. The mist swirled around my ankles, carrying the faint scent of something sweet, almost floral. My mind tried to grasp reason. Was it grief, twisting perception, fatigue, hunger? yet my body screamed that this was real. The laughter returned, louder now, shrieking faintly, like wind through hollow branches. I felt a brush against my shoulder. Cold, not wind, not human. I did not turn. I could not. My rosary was my anchor, my only tether to the living world. I whispered faster prayers. The air grew heavier. The stones seemed closer. Shadows stretched unnaturally, moving of their own accord. Then the figure spoke, not words, a mimicry of a child's voice, faint and broken. Father, Father, I froze. My mind faltered. I have guided the dying, comforted the bereaved, faced death countless times. But this was different. This was intent, watching, waiting. I whispered a new prayer, one I had never said aloud. May your laughter, though brief, reach heaven. May your joy be remembered. The laughter stopped. The mist thinned. The hill felt empty, but the weight remained. Something unseen had been here. Something that did not belong entirely to this world. Back in the rectory, I could not sleep. I wrote in the parish log, careful to note nothing tangible, no footprints, no disturbance. Officially, the cemetery was as it had been, but I could not erase the memory. Her eyes. That impossible movement. The laughter that defied explanation. Weeks later, I returned. Daylight, the frost had passed. The sun touched the small crosses with a pale light, yet the feeling remained. Reverence, yes, but also a lingering pulse, subtle and insistent. I walked slowly, hand on stone, whispering names. I prayed for parents, infants, little ones taken too soon. I prayed for peace, and I whispered for the laughter too. May it echo beyond the veil, reaching those who remain. I never saw her again, not the figure, not the movement, but sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, or when a shadow falls in the wrong place, I feel it. The hint of presence, a breath that is not mine, a fleeting touch that brushes my sleeve. And I know that some things, some spirits, linger not to frighten, but to remind us that life and death are threads of the same cloth. Priests walk between these worlds daily, between the living and the dead, between grief and hope, silence and memory. Sometimes, in that space, the veil thins, and you hear things the world cannot explain. Laughter, whispers, footsteps that leave no mark. We learn to accept it, not with fear, but with reverence. I pray more now for the living, yes, for the dead, always, and for the spaces between, where presence lingers, unclaimed and patient, waiting for someone willing to remember. On some nights, if I close my eyes and walk slowly among the stones, I hear it again, faint, impossible. A child's laugh, carried on the wind, rising and falling, reminding me that sorrow and joy, death and life, are never as far apart as we believe. And I whisper back, we hear you, we remember. I have always felt the dead watch more than the living. Not with anger, not with malice, simply with patience. The parish cemetery is my sanctuary, and sometimes, my confessional. I know every stone, every name, every story etched in granite. But some nights, the stories find you before you even know they're there. It was a cold, moonless night in early November. I had finished a funeral for a woman no one remembered. Her children had moved away. Her husband had died years prior. The ceremony had been quiet, the prayers routine. But I lingered. I always lingered. I walked the grounds, whispering prayers for those who cannot speak. Tonight, the fog clung to the stones like wet cloth. I made my way toward the old section of the cemetery, where graves are unkempt, stones chipped and leaning. The air smelled of decay, damp earth, and something faintly metallic. I passed the veterans' plots, noting the small flags drooping in the cold. And then, near the children's hill, I saw it, a shadow, small, swift, moving between the headstones like it knew every inch of the ground. My first thought was a child, perhaps someone's visitor who wandered off. I stepped closer, the fog pressed around my legs. I expected to see footprints in the soft soil. There were none. The ground lay undisturbed, perfectly still. Then I heard it. A voice low at first, soft whispering my name. Father, Father. My heart skipped. I do not fear easily, not after decades of tending the dying. But this voice, it was both innocent and knowing. It carried a weight that twisted my stomach and pressed my lungs. I gripped my rosary. I whispered prayers I barely remembered. Faster than usual, desperate, the voice came again, closer now. A faint giggle, small and dry, like branches scraping a window in winter. I looked around. Nothing, no child, no figure, just fog curling over stone and earth. I stepped forward, calling aloud, "Who's there?" Silence answered, then movement just at the edge of my vision. Something darted from one grave to another, too quick to track. My eyes searched frantically, heart pounding, skin tight. I whispered again, "Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord." The giggling stopped. Silence hung like a weight. I began walking carefully, tracing the graves I knew well. A boy who died at 6, a girl taken in a car accident, an infant I had baptized only hours before she passed. I touched the stones, whispering prayers. The fog shifted, the air grew colder, and then I saw hers more pale, standing behind a leaning cross. She did not move, her eyes dark to dark held mine. She tilted her head slightly, smiling, not a smile of joy, a smile of understanding, almost patient. Then she vanished, not running, not stepping aside, gone like she had never been there. I fell to my knees, my breath ragged, my prayers frantic. May they find peace, may their laughter reach heaven. But the cemetery had another plan. The fog thickened, curling around my legs, around my body. Whispers multiplied, faint voices calling my name, repeating my prayers back to me in broken tones. I staggered, clutching the rosary. My chest ached, the air grew heavier. I could feel pressure on my shoulders, gentle, insistent, something brushing against my robes. A small hand, or perhaps the suggestion of one. I dared not look. My mind screamed at me to flee, yet my feet were rooted. Reverence held me there. Fear could not pull me from duty. Then it began again, the laughter, louder now, clearer, piercing, all around me. I spun, trying to locate it. The fog moved faster, swirling like it had life. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the stones. I whispered faster prayers, beads slipping through my fingers, the cold searing my skin, and just as suddenly, it stopped. Silence returned, thick and absolute. The fog thinned. The hill seemed ordinary again, yet I knew it was not. Something remained. Something unseen, patient, watching, waiting. I did not leave immediately. I traced the stones, whispering names. My lips trembled, my hands shook. The dead do not forgive mistakes, and tonight, I had trespassed their world. Back at the rectory, I could not sleep. I recorded the incident in the parish log, sterile and factual. No footprints, no disturbance. Cemetery quiet. Legally, nothing had happened. Spiritually, everything had happened. I replayed it over and over in my mind, the figure, the laughter, the whispering voices. Each replay tightened the weight in my chest. Weeks later, I returned during daylight. The children's hill seemed lighter, safer in the sun. But I walked slowly, hands brushing stones, whispering prayers. May your joy, however brief, reach heaven. May your presence linger in peace. The wind shifted. I thought I heard a soft giggle, playful, fleeting. I did not turn, I only whispered back. We remember, we listen. I never saw the figure again, never heard the voices, never felt the brush of unseen fingers, and yet, I do not walk that hill without reverence. Sometimes, in the deep quiet of night, I feel it again, the weightless presence, the fleeting laughter, not to frighten, not to haunt, but to remind me, and anyone who listens, that life and death are threads woven together, that grief, hope, and memory exist beyond the veil, that some mysteries are not to be explained, only witnessed. Priests stand daily between worlds, between life and death, between sorrow and hope, silence and memory. And in that space, sometimes, the impossible reaches out. You do not see it, you do not touch it, yet it touches you. And all you can do is kneel, whisper prayers, and remember that even in death there is a voice, a presence, a laugh that defies reason, waiting for someone patient enough to hear it. I have spent decades walking the parish cemetery. Day or night, I return to those stones, carrying the weight of prayers, grief, and memories. Some priests find solace in the sacristy, in the warmth of the church. I have always found mine among the dead. There, silence is honest, and the presence of the departed feels close, almost tangible. It was a damp, fog-heavy evening in late October. The sun had long gone behind thick clouds. I had just completed a graveside for an elderly parishioner. The family had left in silence. I lingered, walking slowly, letting my rosary slide through my fingers as I whispered prayers. The fog curled around my legs, chilling, insistent, like it had a will of its own. I wandered toward the children's section, a hill lined with tiny crosses and delicate markers. I have always felt a heavier weight here. Funerals for children leave a mark no sermon can wash away. Each small grave carries grief so raw it humbles even the most seasoned priest. That night, The air itself seemed to thicken around me. Then I saw it, a movement swift, silent, between the stones. At first I thought it was a visitor's child, perhaps running to meet their parents. But the ground was soft from rain, and there were no footprints. The grass lay untouched. The figure did not step on the earth. My heart began to race. I gripped my rosary. My prayers faltered for a moment before spilling out in whispers. A childlike laugh broke the stillness. Sharp, bright, impossible. It came from everywhere and nowhere. It circled me, fleeting, playful, and wrong. I froze. I know these graves. I have prayed over them. I have seen parents collapse with grief beside them. And here was laughter, impossible and untamed, rising among stones where no living child remained. I followed it carefully, every step deliberate. My eyes caught glimpses of movement, a shadow flickering between crosses, a form too small, too light, almost weightless. It paused and I saw her, a little girl, pale, hair loose, no more than 7. She tilted her head, smiled faintly, and vanished, not running, not stepping aside, simply gone. I fell to my knees, whispering prayers faster than ever. Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord. May their joy, however brief, reach heaven. The laughter returned, louder now, echoing like it carried through time itself. I felt a brush against my shoulder, a presence light but insistent, something cold, pressing, fleeting. My heart pounded, my knees trembled. I did not move. I could not. Reverence held me in place. Then, a whisper, faint, broken, almost mimicking a child's voice. Father, it repeated, dragging the syllable out, distorted, like it had traveled across years and sorrow. I did not respond. I could not. My voice caught in my throat. I gripped the rosary, whispering every prayer I could recall, beads sliding through my fingers like water. Suddenly, everything stopped. The fog thinned. The laughter vanished. Silence returned, thick and heavy. The small stones seemed ordinary again, leaning and chipped in the cold. I remained on my knees, shaking, whispering names aloud. Sarah, Matthew, an infant I had baptized hours before her death. Each stone a memory I could never erase, now joined by something I could not explain. Back in the rectory, sleep did not come. I wrote a note in the parish log, dry and factual. No footprints, no disturbance, nothing unusual to report. Yet my mind replayed every moment. The laughter, the fleeting figure, the cold touch. Weeks later, I returned during the day. The hill seemed calm, normal, the wind rustling leaves softly. Yet I walked slowly, hand brushing stone after stone, whispering prayers for the little ones, for the families, and for the laughter I had heard. Even now, I sometimes hear it, not in the cemetery, but in quiet moments, in the dead stillness of night. A faint giggle, delicate, almost imperceptible. It carries no malice, only presence. I do not fear it, I never will. Reverence is stronger than fear. It reminds me that the living and the dead are not separate, that grief, memory, and fleeting joy intertwine, and sometimes, the dead choose to speak. Priests walk daily between worlds, between sorrow and hope, silence and prayer, life and death. And sometimes, if you are patient, if you are reverent, you hear the impossible. You feel it brushing against you, a fleeting presence, a whisper, a laugh. You cannot explain it, you cannot name it, you only listen, you only remember. I walk the children's hill last every visit. I trace each small stone with my fingers. I whisper each name. I pray for peace. And sometimes, I whisper to them, softly, we remember, we listen. The fog has not returned. The figure has not reappeared. But the memory is alive, patient, waiting. A reminder that life and death are threads of the same cloth. That some mysteries are not for understanding, only for witnessing. Even now, decades later, I feel it. The presence in the silence, the hint of laughter carried on the wind, the weightless brush of something unseen, not to frighten, not to haunt, but to remind me that even in sorrow, even in grief, even in death, there is a trace of joy, and a voice that cannot be silenced. I have always felt that some places are alive in ways the living cannot understand. The parish cemetery is one of them. Not with movement you can see, but with a weight, a presence, a patience that presses against your chest. I have walked its paths thousands of times, never like this. It was a bitter night in December. The wind howled through skeletal trees. Fog hugged the ground, curling around stones like fingers. I had just finished a funeral for a man who had died alone. His family was gone. The ceremony had been quiet, the prayers routine. I lingered, as I always do. I walk among the graves, whispering prayers for those whose voices have long since faded. I turn toward the children's section. Even in daylight, the hill carries a sorrow heavier than any adult grave. Tonight, it was almost unbearable. The fog thickened around me. My breath formed white clouds. And then I heard it. A whisper. Faint. Broken. Father. I froze. I gripped my rosary tighter. My heart pounded. I scanned the stones. Nothing moved, yet I knew it was here. Something patient. Something waiting. Then the laughter started. Low at first. Brittle. Like ice cracking, then louder. All around me high-pitched, playful, wrong. It shifted as I moved. Never coming from one place. My skin crawled. I whispered prayers. Faster now. Trembling. Eternal rest. Grant unto them, O Lord. The laughter paused. Silence pressed like a stone against my chest. I stepped closer to a small stone, my fingers brushing the cold granite. A child should not be here, yet I felt eyes on me, not imagined. I turned. There she was, a little girl, pale, hair loose, standing on the grave of an infant I had baptized. Her eyes were dark, too dark, reflecting nothing. She tilted her head, smiling, not sweetly, not warmly, but knowingly, like she held secrets meant to break you. I whispered her name aloud. The smile widened, then she was gone, but she had left a trace of coldness in the air, a pressure against my chest, a whisper brushing my ear. Father. The ground shook slightly beneath my feet, not enough to topple stones, just enough. Then I saw movement in the fog, figures, more children emerging, translucent, pale eyes, hollow yet fixed on me. I counted 6, then 8, then more than I could track. They moved silently, gliding over the ground. Their laughter merged into one sound, a chorus of something human and not human. I fell to my knees. My rosary slipped through my fingers. My prayers became frantic, incoherent. May they rest. May their joy reach heaven. May their souls be free. The voices answered, whispering, mocking, echoing my words back to me. The laughter rose, filling every space, pressing against my ears, my chest, my heart. One touched me. Not a hand, not flesh, but something icy, crawling up my arm like frost. I screamed, though no one was there to hear it. The fog twisted, thickened, and for a moment I was surrounded, trapped, the stones stretching impossibly high, closing in, leaning toward me. And then, silence, abrupt, deafening. My knees ached, my hands shook, the fog lifted slightly, the figures were gone, only the small stones remained, ordinary, leaning in the cold moonlight, yet I knew they had not left. Something lingered, patient, hungry for acknowledgement. I staggered to my feet. I whispered a prayer I had never said aloud before. I see you. I hear you. I remember you. A faint giggle answered, fading into the wind. Not mocking, not cruel, but a reminder, a warning. The dead do not forgive ignorance. The dead do not vanish without leaving something behind. Back in the rectory, I could not sleep. Every shadow in the room seemed to stretch toward me. Every creak of the old floorboards sounded like tiny footsteps. I wrote it in the parish log, sterile and factual. No footprints, no disturbance, cemetery quiet. But I could not erase the memory, the presence, the touch, the laughter that felt like it had reached into my chest and left something behind. Weeks later, I returned during daylight. The hill seemed lighter. The sun warmed the stones, yet I walked slowly, hand brushing each small marker. I whispered prayers for the little ones, for the families, for the laughter I had heard. And sometimes, when the wind shifted just right, I swear I hear it again. A small, brittle giggle. A whisper of something impossible. Father, I do not fear it. Reverence holds the fear at bay. I know now that priests walk daily between worlds, between life and death, between sorrow and hope, silence and memory. And in that space, sometimes, the impossible reaches out, not to harm, not to frighten, but to remind us that grief, joy, memory, and presence are threads woven together, that some voices, some presences, are meant to be heard, even if only for a moment. At night, when the rectory is still, I sometimes feel it again, the brush of something weightless on my shoulder, the faintest echo of laughter. I whisper back, we remember, we listen, and I pray, for the living, for the dead, and for the spaces between, for those who cannot rest, for those who wait, and for myself, so that I may continue to walk among the stones, knowing that some things are not meant to be explained, only witnessed, only remembered, and only feared with reverence. I have walked the parish cemetery for decades. Daylight, moonlight, fog, frosted. Doesn't matter, I know every stone, every name. I know the way grief lingers in the air. But some nights the dead do not wait quietly. They move, they watch, they reach. It was late November, the sky was black, clouds thick as tombstones. I had just finished a funeral for a man who had lived alone, his family scattered. The ceremony was simple, the prayers rote. I lingered, always lingered. The cemetery has its own rhythm at night, a rhythm I had followed without fear, until that night I turned toward the Children's Hill. The small stones gleamed faintly under the feeble moonlight. I felt it immediately, a pool in the air, cold and heavy, like someone breathing on my neck when no one is there. I gripped my rosary, every instinct screaming that this was not ordinary. Then I saw it, a small figure crouched among the graves, pale, still watching. I called softly, but the figure did not respond. It tilted its head, a slow, deliberate motion, and then it moved, not running, not walking, but gliding. The fog seemed to bend around it, curling like fingers. I stepped closer, no footprints, nothing disturbed, just silence and the faint smell of wet soil and decay. A giggle broke the quiet high pitch, twisted, not human, not innocent. It echoed, bouncing off stones, multiplying. Then another giggle, closer this time, as if something brushed past my ear. I spun, but the fog swallowed everything. The figure was gone. I whispered prayers faster, beads slipping through my hands. Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord. The laughter stopped. Silence, thick and heavy, pressed against me. I dared a step forward, and the figure reappeared. A girl, pale, hair loose, standing on the grave of an infant I had baptized. She smiled, not a sweet smile, a knowing smile, as if she held secrets meant to terrify. I swallowed hard. My mind raced. My instincts screamed at me to flee, but my feet were rooted. I have faced death countless times. I have comforted parents in grief, held hands soaked with tears. But this was different. I could feel the presence of many children, dozens, maybe more, gathering silently in the fog, watching, waiting. The air grew colder. My breath formed clouds that vanished too quickly. A brush against my shoulder, icy, insistent, made me stumble. I whispered another prayer. The fog thickened, twisting, moving like a living thing. Shadows stretched across the stones, forming shapes that were almost human, almost children, almost something else. And then they spoke, dozens of voices, whispering my name. Father, 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 each whisper overlapping, impossible to locate, impossible to ignore. I fell to my knees, clutching my rosary, shaking. The laughter returned, louder now, a chorus of something alive and angry, joyful and wrong. One figure emerged from the mist, taller than the others, hollow-eyed, translucent. It raised a hand. A whisper dragged from it, echoing like 1,000 voices in unison. Join us, I screamed, though there was no one to hear it. The fog swirled around me, closing in, pressing against my chest, my ears, my mind. Figures moved faster now, darting between stones, merging, splitting, impossible in number. The wind carried faint whispers, faint touches, the sensation of little fingers brushing my clothes, tugging at my sleeves. I collapsed fully to the ground. My rosary beads spilled across wet earth. My prayers became frantic, incoherent. May they rest. May their laughter reach heaven. May their souls be free. The voices answered, mimicking, mocking, echoing my words back to me. Then a shadow passed over my face. I looked up. The girl, pale, smiling, she tilted her head. The shadows behind her surged, figures rising from the graves themselves, soil crumbling like dust, the outlines of children forming in the moonlight. The pressure in the air was suffocating. I could feel them all, watching, pressing closer, waiting for acknowledgement, waiting for fear. I whispered a prayer I had never said aloud before. I see you. I hear you. I remember you. The girl's smile softened. The figures froze. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the fog thinned. The whispers, the giggles, the pressure vanished. The stones leaned in silence, ordinary and still. I remained kneeling for what felt like hours. I traced the small stones, whispering each name aloud. Sarah, Matthew, an infant I had held in my arms hours before her death. I whispered for peace. I whispered for remembrance. I whispered for their laughter. Weeks later, I returned during daylight. The hills seemed calm. The wind stirred leaves across the stones. Yet I walked slowly, touching each grave, whispering prayers. And sometimes, if the wind shifted just right, I heard it. A faint giggle, a whisper. Father, I do not fear it. Reverence holds the fear at bay. I have learned that priests walk daily between worlds, between life and death. sorrow and hope, silence and memory. Sometimes, in that space, the impossible reaches out. You do not see it, you do not touch it, yet it touches you. And all you can do is kneel, whisper prayers, and remember. Even now, decades later, I feel it, the brush of something weightless against my shoulder, the faint echo of laughter carried on the wind, the sense of presence lingering in spaces where grief and memory meet, not to harm, not to frighten, but to remind you that life and death are threads of the same cloth, that some voices are not meant to be understood and witnessed, only remembered, only feared with reverence. And sometimes, when the night is cold and the cemetery is silent, if you walk slowly, whisper prayers, and watch the fog curl around the stones, you may hear it too, the laughter, the whispers, the weightless presence of children who never left. And you will know that the dead do not forgive ignorance. They only wait, patiently, eternally. I have walked this cemetery for more years than I can count. Daylight, moonlight, fog, frost, it does not matter. Every stone is familiar, every name etched into my memory. But there are nights when familiarity becomes a trap. Nights when the dead do not rest. They wait, they watch, and they remember. It was early December. The wind tore across the hill, rattling loose branches against each other like dry bones. The fog was thick, curling over the graves like living smoke. I had just finished a funeral for a man who had died alone, his family scattered across states. The service was quiet, the prayers routine. Yet I stayed behind, as I always do. I walk, I pray, I remember. But that night, I should have left. I turned toward the children's section. The small stones gleamed faintly in the cold moonlight, leaning as if trying to whisper secrets. The air felt heavier here. I sensed something before I saw it, a shadow moving too quickly between stones. A child, I thought. But the ground was soft with frost. There were no footprints, nothing disturbed. Then I heard the first sound, a giggle, sharp, brittle, echoing off the stones. Wrong, playful, yes, but cruel in a way I could not place. I gripped my rosary, my fingers cold and trembling. I whispered prayers, words spilling fast, frantic. Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord. The giggle returned, louder, circling me, then a soft, high-pitched whisper, Father. My heart skipped. I scanned the fog, nothing, but I felt eyes, dozens watching, patient, waiting, knowing. A figure appeared, pale, small, a girl, no older than 7, standing atop the grave of an infant I had baptized. Her hair hung loose, wet with fog. She tilted her head, and the smile she offered was not innocence. It was understanding, knowledge, and then she ran through the stones. Impossible speed, no sound of footsteps, leaving nothing but the cold air brushing my face. I stumbled back, prayers tumbling from my lips. Frantic and broken, may they rest, may their laughter reach heaven. The fog swelled faster, curling around my legs, my chest. Then came more shadows, figures rising from the fog, pale, thin, eyes hollow, mouths open in laughter that carried through the hill like wind through a grave. I counted them, then lost count. 8, 12, dozens. I could not tell. They moved in ways children do not, gliding, merging, separating, multiplying. One reached me, not a hand, not flesh, but a cold pressure, brushing my shoulder. I fell to my knees, the ground wet and soft beneath me. My rosary slipped through my fingers. My voice trembled as I whispered prayers I had never dared say aloud. I see you, I hear you, I remember you. The laughter stopped abruptly. The figures froze, and then a sound worse than laughter, a scream. Not one voice, but 1,000, overlapping, piercing, carrying grief, rage, and despair all at once. It echoed in my chest, rattled my bones. I gasped for breath, but the air seemed thick, heavy, suffocating. Then I saw her again, the girl, pale, smiling, tilting her head, but this time, she was different. Her eyes were black, deep pits, reflecting nothing. Behind her, the ground moved, the graves shifted, tiny hands clawed from the soil. Faces emerged, pale and hollow, mouths opening in silent screams. The fog carried their whispers. Father, join us, I screamed, stumbling backward, and something grabbed my ankle. Ice, not flesh, not rope, but a hand of pure cold that tugged at me. I pulled, fell, the rosary scattering across frost and soil. Shadows surged, twisting into shapes I cannot describe. They pressed closer, circling, silent now, watching, waiting for fear to crack me completely. I forced myself to stand. I whispered a prayer I had never said, We remember, we honor, we do not forget. The girl's smile softened, just for a moment. The shadows froze. The cold grip vanished. And then the fog lifted slightly, leaving the cemetery ordinary, stones leaning in quiet moonlight. Yet I knew it had not left. Something remained, patient, watching, waiting. Back in the rectory, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the floor sounded like tiny footsteps. Every shadow stretched toward me. My dreams were filled with laughter, whispers, and glimpses of pale faces tilting from graves. I recorded the night in the parish log. Sterile, factual, no footprints, no disturbance, cemetery quiet. Legally, nothing happened. Spiritually, everything had happened. Weeks later, I returned during daylight. The hills seemed calm, innocent, but I walked slowly, touching each small stone, whispering prayers for the little ones. And sometimes, if the wind shifted just right, I heard it a faint giggle, a whisper. Father, I do not fear it. Reverence holds the fear at bay. I have learned that priests walk daily between worlds, between life and death, sorrow and hope, silence and memory. And in that space, the impossible reaches out. Not to harm, not to frighten, only to remind you that grief, joy, memory, and presence are threads woven together. That some voices, some presences, are never silent. Sometimes, when the night is black and the fog curls low across the stones, I walk slowly, whisper prayers, and watch. I feel the brush of something weightless on my shoulder, the echo of laughter carried on the wind, and I whisper back, we remember, we listen, and if you listen closely, if you are patient, reverent, you might hear it too. The laughter, the whispers, the children who never left, waiting, patient, eternal. I have long believed that cemeteries are not just resting places for the dead. They are crossroads, places where sorrow and memory gather like fog, and sometimes, where the restless whisper. I have walked these grounds for decades, yet there are nights that leave marks on your soul you cannot wash away. It was a bitter night in January. Frost glittered on the stones. The wind tore through bare trees, rattling dry branches against each other. I had just concluded a funeral for a man whose life was brief and cruelly ended. The family had left in silence. I stayed behind, as always, walking the grounds, praying, remembering. But this night, the cemetery remembered me. I turned toward the older section, where the ground is uneven and stones lean at impossible angles. A low fog clung to the earth, curling and twisting. I sensed something almost immediately, a presence that was not human. The air grew heavier. My chest tightened. The silence carried weight. A whisper. Father, I froze. My hand went to my rosary. My voice trembled as I whispered prayers, trying to anchor myself. Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord. The whisper came again, faint, urgent, impossible to locate. Then I saw it, a figure at the edge of my vision, a small boy, pale, crouched behind a gravestone, his eyes too wide, too dark, fixed on me. He stepped forward, and the fog seemed to bend around him. I took a step back. No sound, no footprints. The frost was undisturbed. A giggle followed, high-pitched, brittle, and utterly wrong. It echoed across the hill, bouncing off stones, layering over itself like it came from everywhere at once. My chest ached, my knees shook. I whispered prayers faster, frantic. The fog twisted, curling around my legs, my hands, the beads slipping through my fingers. Then the voices multiplied, children's whispers, dozens, maybe hundreds, overlapping. Father, Father, Father. Their tones were all wrong, not innocent, not human, sharp, cold, insistent. They were calling me, circling me, pressing into my mind. I fell to the ground, unable to move, unable to think. Figures emerged from the fog, pale, thin eyes hollow, moving in impossible ways, gliding, twisting, forming shapes that defied the laws of the living. Some were familiar children I had prayed over, graves I had blessed, others unknown. Their mouths opened in silent screams, their laughter and whispers entwined in my head, pressing, testing, breaking. A touch, cold, ice, something wrapped around my wrist. Not flesh, not rope, but a presence, desperate, insistent. I screamed. My rosary slipped from my fingers, clattering across frost-covered ground. Shadows surged, circling, merging, splitting, impossible in number. I felt them pressing closer, waiting for fear to crack me completely. I forced myself to rise. Whispered prayers spilled from my lips like water, frantic, broken. May they rest. May their laughter reach heaven. May their souls be free. The voices mocked me, echoing every word back in twisted, overlapping tones. The cold pressed harder, hands of fog, ice, and absence tugging at me, drawing me to the ground. And then silence, abrupt, deafening. I stood alone, breath ragged, teeth chattering, fog curling around my knees. The figures vanished, leaving stones ordinary again, leaning in quiet moonlight. Yet I knew they had not gone. They waited, patient, watching, knowing I had seen too much. Back in the rectory, I could not sleep. Every creak of the floor sounded like footsteps. Every shadow stretched unnaturally. My dreams were filled with whispers, laughter, and fleeting pale faces. I wrote the night in the parish log, sterile and factual. No footprints, no disturbance. Cemetery quiet. Legally nothing had happened. Spiritually, everything had happened. Weeks later, I returned in daylight. The fog had lifted. The hill seemed calm, normal, but I walked slowly, touching each stone, whispering prayers for the little ones, for the families, for the laughter I had heard. And sometimes, if the wind shifted just right, I swear I hear it, a faint giggle, a whisper, "Father, I do not fear it." Reverence holds the fear at bay. I have learnt that priests walk daily between worlds, between life and death, sorrow and hope, silence and memory. And in that space, sometimes, the impossible reaches out. You do not see it, you do not touch it, yet it touches you. And all you can do is kneel, whisper prayers, and remember. Even now, decades later, I feel it. The brush of something weightless against my shoulder. The echo of laughter carried on the wind. The sense of presence lingering in spaces where grief and memory meet. Not to harm, not to frighten, but to remind you that life and death are threads of the same cloth. That some voices, some presences, are never silent. And sometimes, when the night is black and the fog curls low across the stones, I walk slowly, whisper prayers, and watch. I feel them, the weightless brush on my shoulder, the laughter carried on the wind, and I whisper back, we remember, we listen. And if you listen closely, if you are patient, reverent, you might hear it too. The whispers, the laughter, the children who never left, waiting, patient, eternal. If you felt the chill of their whispers, if the laughter of the unseen still echoes in your mind, don't let it end here. Subscribe now, and join us as we step into the shadows, where the dead have stories to tell and the living can only listen. Like, share, and hit the bell, because the next story could be closer than you think, waiting, watching, and calling your name.